I became an American 10 years ago, so in spite of the sound, I'll try and speak loudly and act like an American. I don't mean that. That's not true. And that's really not what I mean at all. It came out wrong. No, but when I went for my meeting to be approved of as an American citizen, I said, can I keep my other passports? Because I'm British and Australian. And the very kind lady said, we don't mind how many passports you have, as long as you have allegiance for the United States. So I have to feel like an American. Okay, I'm going to start with a little prayer, but I always like to say, don't get all holy just because I say the word prayer. Because actually a prayer is, words sung to a nice tune, hopefully. I'll sing it in Tibetan. And words express thoughts, and thoughts is the mind. And we're going to talk about the mind, because I would suggest, the mind is Buddha's expertise. That's what the Buddha deals with. So we'll look into this. So this prayer is expressing two thoughts. The first two lines can be for anybody in this room who maybe already kind of identifies with being a Buddhist, so it's reminding us of our reliance on the Buddhist teachings and so on. And the second two lines can be for all of us, and it's expressing an altruistic kind of reason for our being here together. So stating our purpose, if you like. So we're going to sit here for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and let's see what happens. And we're going to all listen, and I'm going to be listening too, even though I speak to Buddha's take on the world, on the mind, happiness, suffering, humanity, blah, 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 But the key thing is to hear it in a practical sense, meaning to take some tools from it. If this were a cooking class and I just raved on about how lovely cakes are, you'd walk out disappointed. You need a few recipes. So to listen to it as if it's advice. But you don't have to take it, because Buddha is not the boss. And I really like to say that very seriously. He's not a creator, he's not the boss, he doesn't assert a creator. We are the boss. So listen to it as if it were advice, and if there's something you can take, then fantastic. And why? What do you need the tool for? Well, to develop what for the Buddha is this astonishing potential that we all just have naturally. Potential to develop our goodness, if you like, love, compassion, courage, self-confidence, and to lessen all the neuroses, the stuff that makes us miserable, low self-esteem, depression, jealousy, anxiety, anger, fear, these things. That's essentially what he deals with, which we'll talk about. So to develop the good part and get rid of the rubbish. He said, Buddha's view is that we can do this. And so that's for our sake, and then on the other hand, because we live with each other, so that we can, not only for our own sake, but so we can be useful to each other in this crazy world we all occupy. So I'll sing that little prayer, expressing those ideas. Sangye charam soke chognamla jangcho barudagi kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonamki drola penche sangye drupasho Sangye charam soke chognamla jangcho barudagi kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonamki drola penche sangye drupasho Sangye charam soke chognamla jangcho barudagi kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonamki drola penche sangye drupasho. Okay, so there's many ways you can enter into Buddhism, I mean, already you can see, like I'm a nun, I did a prayer, and it's pretty holy up here, So we can say it's got religious components. You go to one of these Tibetan monastic universities and you'll study intense philosophy and psychology and metaphysics for 30 years minimum. But also you can see it from the point of view of meditation. You'll talk about the great yogis in the mountains meditating. So, but the entry point that I find most compelling, that I found most compelling when I first heard these Buddhist teachings, and I think we in our modern contemporary world, the technological world we live in, that we find most compelling is this attitude of the mind, this approach to the mind, being our own therapists. Lama Yeshe, one of my Buddhist teachers, my main teacher, he often said that, be your own psychologist, It's not a cliche to say that being a Buddhist is being your own therapist. It's not a cliche, it sounds like a nice marketing ploy, and it probably is, but it's literally true. Because even though there are these religious components or the other things, they're all actually tools that a person would use, if they so choose, to help to do this actual job of learning to know our mind, the contents of our own mind intimately and well, so that we can fund it, so that we can reconfigure its contents. This is really what you're doing as a Buddhist, you know. And it's got a particularly kind of unique way of observing the mind, of understanding our mind, of investigating the mind, and indeed of changing the mind. So he deals with, it's basically, it's a cognitive process, you know. I think it's, maybe most of us, if we think about Buddhism, we might think about meditation, and then we think of the word mindfulness. It's about the best we can do, and even many Buddhists think it's probably that. But actually there's this model of the mind that came from these Hindus more than 3,000 years ago. The Dalai Lama, I read recently, said it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began this astonishing investigation into the nature of self. You know, the nature of self. And so as a result, they were the ones who came up with this remarkable, sophisticated psychological technique that's known broadly these days as mindfulness, but which actually is a really clear technique that enables a person to plumb the depths of their own mind to a degree of incredible subtlety and refinement that we don't even posit as existing in our culture, in our models of the mind, you know? So to really understand Buddhism, we need to understand what he means by the mind. So let's look at his definition. Well, first of all, the use of the word mind, it's often used synonymously with the word consciousness. These have equal meaning. The second thing is that it's used in a much more subjective way, more tasty, experiential way than I think the way we use it, possibly. But the main first point, and this is, you know, oh, by the way, the way to listen to this is not to hear it as a bunch of beliefs. This Buddha, this fellow called Buddha, 2,500 years ago, who came out of this Indian tradition and went off and diverged in his own direction, and it was all in relation to his own particular findings in his own mind, in the depths of these meditation techniques, about the nature of the mind, who we are, and what our potential is. So it's coming to his own experience. There's no concept in Buddhism of a creator. So therefore what is called Buddhism is not from revelation. It's not something to be believed. It's not something that he had a dream about or a vision of. It's the result of his own hard inner work, you know? And I'm not kidding when I say that if I were Einstein up here telling you about relativity, you know very well I didn't have a vision about it. You know it wasn't revealed to me. You know I didn't have a dream. You definitely know that I'm not asking you to believe me. And you know it's coming as a result of my hard work. This is honestly, quite literally, is the exact same approach in Buddhism. Which is contrary, I would assume, to our usual views about what we call a religion, you know? We assume, and I mean, I was born a Catholic, so naturally God was my boss. I had faith in God. God had a plan of the universe because he created the universe. And it wasn't my job to stick my nose in God's job, you know? Like a good Christian friend of mine said, I try to get out of the way so God can do his job. This is perfect. And my job is to have faith in God. I think it's totally appropriate. But that's not the Buddhist view. Buddha is not a creator. He was this regular guy who, through his own hard work in his own mind, became this person called a Buddha, you know. In fact, the Tibetan word is very interesting. The etymology of it is kind of interesting. The Tibetan word, the Tibetan equivalent of the Sanskrit words, is sangye. Well, the first syllable implies the utter eradication from this mind of ours of all the neuroses, basically, all the voices of ego, the stuff that we, in our models of the mind, totally take for granted as kind of natural parts of the mind. Anger, jealousy, fear, neurosis, these things. You know, we give equal status to these along with love, compassion, and all the rest. But the Buddha's view is that this stuff, you know, we can get rid of it. This is a job, a long-term job of a person using Buddha's technology, his methodology is basically where you're heading with this, you know. So this first syllable, yes, sang, implies the total eradication from one's mind of all the neuroses, which is a pretty radical concept and pretty crazy in our world. And secondly, this syllable, ge, implies the total development to perfection, essentially, of all the goodness. Speaking very simply. And it is this is a bit of a shocking concept. One of you, no doubt, perhaps some of you are therapists, if I came to you and asked you very sincerely for methods to get rid of all ego, all fear, all no self-esteem, all anger, all jealousy, and develop infinite love for all sentient beings all the time, I think you'll think I'm mentally ill. Sincerely, but this is literally what Buddha's saying. But the trouble is because we read Buddhism, in either the Tibetan tradition, which is very medieval, if not older than that, or India from 2,500 years ago, and they keep their own way of speaking very nicely. If you put it into this modern terminology, then it sounds what I'm saying. What I'm saying is literally what Buddha says. It's kind of a surprise to us. A bit shocking, in fact. So the first point about the mind, anyway, well, this is one of the first points, that this consciousness of ours, this mind of ours, has this potential. The next point about it, where he's fundamentally different from our view, he does not assert that it's physical. He doesn't deny we have a brain. There's marvellous findings the last 30 years in these discussions, run especially by this organisation called Mind and Life, their website, mindandlife.org, who organise these amazing conversations between the best brains in the West and the Dalai Lama and kind of his lot, discussing these things. And much of the findings coming out these days about neuroplasticity are coming from these conversations, and most of which have been published. So there's marvellous meeting grounds. But the essential point to take, if you like, as a hypothesis here in this discussion, is that your mind is not your brain. Your brain plays an intimate role, but a crucial point for the Buddha. The next point about the mind, as I've already implied, is it goes to far more subtle levels of cognition. Its function is to cognize. And we have these far more subtle, more refined levels of mind that, as I said before, that we don't even posit as existing in our models of the mind. This next point, that this mind has this astonishing potential to be rid of the rubbish and full of the goodness, which sounds completely, there's no concept like that. We can't conceive of a person who doesn't have some jealousy, some anger, some low self-esteem, some depression. They would sound mentally ill if they didn't. But this is exactly the Buddha's point. The next thing about the mind, which is equally shocking, there's not one atom of it that's given to us by anybody else. We are not the handiwork of someone else. Yes, our body, mummy and daddy work very hard to get that egg sperm together. But the Buddha would say that's merely your brain, merely your genes, your DNA and your body, which do play a powerful role, but they are crucially not your mind, not your consciousness, not your thoughts, not your feelings. We can see this is a fundamentally different view, And you're not a product of a superior being. Buddha even uses the term superior being, and we can all become one, having achieved this potential he has found that we have all got. But he doesn't have the concept of a creator. He would say it's an unnecessary embellishment. So if you have faith in a creator, don't be insulted by that. But this is Buddha's own findings. So therefore, if we don't come from God, and we don't come from mummy and daddy, then clearly the obvious question is, well, where did I begin? Where do I come from? Well, Buddha basically asserts, and we mightn't go into this too much here, our consciousness, which is not physical, think of it as like a river of mental moments. In Buddhist psychology, we have this term, a mental continuum. This moment of my thoughts and feelings and emotions, whether it's been good at football, or been good at, pedophilia, or being good at music, or love, or compassion, or whatever, all these tendencies in our mind. These tendencies, Buddha would essentially say, well, where do they come from? Well, from the moment, from yesterday, from the day before, and naturally you're going to get back to the first second conception, which in the Buddhist view is when your consciousness came into that egg and sperm, which is the beginning of this new person. Well, that consciousness, these tendencies in my mind, for good or bad or whatever, don't come from mummy, daddy, they're not components of my body, and they don't come from a superior being, and they certainly don't come from nothing. So that's why Buddha would assert a continuity of consciousness, which is another way of saying that is this business of reincarnation. This is dealt with in great depth in the Buddhist literature. The consciousness comes from its own continuity before this conception. We come fully programmed for the Buddha into our mummy's egg and sperm, daddy and mummy's egg and sperm at the time of conception. We bring our own stuff with us, he says. So this is this business of karma, Again, you might not go into that here. But this is a massive point from the Buddhist perspective of who we are and where we come from. So the point is, many Buddhists, might not look into all this stuff. I come from this Tibetan Buddhist monastic tradition, and I know since a little girl I've always wanted kind of a big view, a big kind of view of the world, who we are, why happiness, why suffering. I kind of never went the scientific way, I went more the political way. I grew up a Catholic in Melbourne, very devoted to God. I was in love with God, in love with Our Lady, in love with the saints. At the same time as being really naughty, And then by the time I was 15, I bought a record at a school fair, and it was a 7-inch LP. It said Billie Holiday. My mother was a classical musician. She would never dare to allow me to listen to it. But I thought, I wonder who he is, So since hearing Billie Holiday and then Miles Davis, that kind of blew my mind and opened me up to a whole new world, to my religious aspirations. Because since I was a little girl, I knew I'd got to be a priest or a nun or something. Then it became more social. And by the time I was 19 in the late 60s, mid-60s, I was ripe and ready for revolution, so it was kind of like goodbye God, hello boys, you know? Because you couldn't have both a Catholic, and I didn't have much guilt, so it was very clear. So then it was full steam ahead, went off to London in the 60s, and you know, then so when I was a Catholic, I would joke and say that when I was a Catholic, and I was really fully into it, I'm a bit radical in my, kind of extreme in my nature. So I was 100% Catholic, completely went to Mass 7 mornings a week, completely in love with God. I'd go to Mass every morning, dying, waiting for these religious experiences to come, you know. I never got one. And then I became a raging, serious hippie. I was very serious in my psychology, with masses of sex, drugs and jazz, not rock and roll. But then very quickly in London in the 60s, you know, ripe and ready for revolution, it was quickly turned into sort of radical left politics. So then so initially it was all the Catholics, the non-Catholics who were the problem, and then it was all the straight people who were the problem, and then it soon became all the rich people who were the problem, and then that kind of moved quickly into supporting black politics at the time of the Panthers, and I was working with people in prison, this was from England. Then it was sort of all the white people were the problem, and then quickly I became a feminist because the time was ripe and ready for radical feminism, so then the male people were the problem. So I sort of, it went very quickly, and I figured by then I'd literally exhausted all options, you know. Or who to blame for the world's problems. So then I bumped into these Tibetan Buddhists, and they suggested I should start looking at myself. It was a brand new idea. So this is the job I'm still trying to do. I haven't got bored with this one yet. So anyway, the Buddhists, so this mind of ours, Buddha would say, it's not physical. Buddha would say it's not the handiwork of another, of a superior being or your parents. It goes to far more subtle, more refined levels of cognition. He's got these marvelous techniques coming from these great Indian beings. This particular one called concentration meditation, the one that's known as mindfulness, that enables you, and it's an intensely difficult technique, not difficult in its nature, but difficult because our mind is addicted to not being concentrated, you know? So to focus the mind to this extremely subtle level where then you do the real work of unpacking and unraveling its contents, because there's not one atom of our mind we can't change, it's not set in stone, so that we can literally reconfigure the contents of our mind. So in order to understand this, we need to know then Buddha's model of the mind. And it's not complicated. It's initially deceptively simple. So we have sensory consciousness, which is very clear. And then we have what they call mental consciousness, you know. So the sensory consciousness for us, we give masses of attention to this, because I mean, we're addicted to the body. Our scientific models even say we are only the body, you know. So of course we pay huge attention to it. As one of our, Lama Yeshe would say, we make the body the boss. So it's really already very fascinating when we look at the Buddhist view of the function of sensory consciousness as opposed to the mental. Already this indicates the Buddhist emphasis, and you'll see my point. So let's say, I look at this cup, and I might go, which I wouldn't, but I might, oh, what a pretty cup. Okay, it's not a bad cup, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a pretty cup. But I could go, oh wow, look at that pretty cup. So we all know immediately, don't we, that then the assumption in those words is that my eye consciousness is cognizing a pretty cup. The pretty cup, or handsome friend, or beautiful, whatever, is a function of the senses. You give me I hear that one trumpet note, and I'll go, wow, Miles Davis. Really, I'm a real Miles fan, Instantaneously, my ear consciousness. And I'll assume it's the product of my ear consciousness. Oh, wow, amazing Miles Davis. But the Buddha's view is very simple. Is that, absurd, of course not. The senses are like dumb animals. They're the entry for us into experiences with the outside world, but they virtually have, they don't have much power and much intelligence, if you like. So essentially what's happening is that the eye consciousness, cognizes basically two things, shape and colour. That's it. So what happens? Where does pretty cup come from? Well, this is not kidding. It's a great analogy, Instantaneously, that my eye consciousness grabs hold of that shape and colour, instantaneously, quicker than Google, and I really mean it's a great analogy, quicker than Google, it accesses my mental consciousness is accessed, which is where all my memories are, all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the memories, all the decisions, all the viewpoints. So I recognise it as a cup. I recognise it as pretty based on my particular taste. So within a millisecond, without recognising the different function of these crucially different parts of my mind, it seems as one unified experience. And what a pretty cup. But actually, what a pretty cup is a story made up by my mental consciousness. And in one sense, this is what Buddha's saying across the board. That our mental consciousness is full of these trillions of this cognitive process, this conceptual stories, that indeed we come programmed with from the first second of conception, but never mind even that which we have kind of constantly grown and developed since the time we can remember. So whatever we think and see out there, we actually think it's a sensory experience, and the senses are involved, but it's deceptive. Pretty cup is a function of a series of thoughts stored in my mind. Divine Miles Davis is a product of a story in my mind. It's an opinion, a viewpoint. And the Buddha's deal actually is that whatever goes on in our mind is indeed a viewpoint. And his crucial point is that some of those viewpoints are valid. And in general, what he would call the virtuous qualities, in this model of the mind, okay, when we get to the mental consciousness, there are basically three categories of states of mind. Really simple, like I said, deceptively simple model. We've got the so-called negative states, and these are not moralistic terms, these are technical terms. Those that are called negative, we know them, anger, jealousy, fear, depression, low self-esteem. Then we've got the virtuous, or the positive ones, and we all know them, love, compassion, empathy, these business. Then there's a third category, which are neither negative nor positive, and there's all the lots of the other stuff, like the mechanics of our mind, intelligence and good memory. That whether you're a thief or a meditator, you need them, you know. These are neither good nor bad in their nature, but they're crucial. So this is studied in immense depth in the literature, the way the mind functions. And we're discussing cognition. We're not discussing physical, we're discussing conceptual thoughts, including, surprisingly, all the emotions. Because Buddha's key point is all the so-called negative and so-called positive, love, compassion, anger, jealousy, whichever one. They're both, even though we call them emotions, and we only really notice them until when they hit our body. But actually, once we start this concentration meditation technique, starts really simple, and what we're learning to do is step out of our head, if you like, and we're beginning to focus the mind, but we can't help but notice these endless thoughts. I mean, I think even in Western psychology, we talk about 1,000 thoughts a second. Buddha would agree, you know. And 99% of the time, we're not aware of it because we don't pay attention to it. So the Buddha's key job, his key point is we need to pay attention to it. Because guess what, folks, he's saying? Whatever goes on in your mind informs the quality of your life. Which is, in a sense, obvious, but in a sense, not. You know, this is a tragedy of human beings. One of the Lamas said, Lama Zopa, he says the vast majority of human beings on this earth have no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. And the Buddhist view would be, because this is so much of the stuff that goes on inside us is completely spontaneous, completely instinctive. We're programmed in it so profoundly that we don't even pay, and that we therefore don't pay attention to it until it comes exploding out the mouth. Like as a child, you know, anger was one of my habits, let's say. I had no idea I was angry until I heard the words. Some of you might go towards the inner aversion, which means you don't know you're depressed until you can't get out of bed one morning. And our trouble is in the West, because we don't have techniques maybe more these days to literally pay attention more to our thoughts and feelings. And I don't mean in a cosmic way, but in a very clear, focused way, being your own therapist. Because it's not really still part of our culture. Our trouble is we wait till the drama happens before we go to the therapist. In other words, we have no maintenance. You know, we have brilliant ways of maintaining houses, cars, bodies, but we wait till we practically have a mental breakdown. And then it's too late, of course, you know. Well, not often. But if you can imagine, if we had techniques in our world that enabled us as children to be familiar with, in a clear, coherent way, our own thoughts and our own feelings. Because Buddha's deal is, all the emotions that we experience when they hit the body, actually, when we start to focus more, we're going to recognize that they're underpinned by these elaborate conceptual stories, these viewpoints, which we've practiced to perfection. But it's not that easy to see it until we start to focus, until we start to go deep inside. And this deep inside sounds a bit cosmic, but it's not at all. It's not kind of a mystical thing. Actually, It's kind of interesting and surprising, I think, when we think of spiritual. You know, if we think of scientific and we think of making a good cake, we know that we need good concentration, reasonable theories, and clarity and precision in order to even get a decent cake. Well, the clarity and precision and depth of analysis that we know you need for that, and not to mention making anything else, is exactly what the Buddha would say we need to investigate this mind of ours. So learning to know your own mind, closing your eyes and looking inside, isn't a cosmic thing, isn't a mystical thing. A person's got these two main things. There's a technique that's called concentration, generally known as mindfulness. It's a very precise, disciplined, psychological procedure, basically, where you learn to focus the mind, learn to pay attention so it's not raving on, and then slowly, based upon knowing, using, let's say, which a Buddhist would do, Buddha's model of the mind, Buddha's very clear presentation of the way these cognitive processes work. On the basis of this, then one would learn to begin to unpack and unravel one's own mind, you know, in a very clear way. Of course, it's the hardest job we'll ever do, because who wants to do that? Because one of our biggest stumbling blocks, one of our biggest stumbling blocks. You know, I mean, I would suggest that's actually also underpinned by the views of our science and our psychology, which says that we are only physical and we are indeed the product of mummy, daddy, and the external world. So, you know, generally speaking, in our materialist models, if I've got a problem, then where will I look? I'll go to my therapist and we will look into the past, won't we? Kind of looking for a needle in a haystack. Where's the cause of why I always get jealous and why I always choose the lousy guys, you know? Where's the cause of it? Back there somewhere. It seems very instinctively true to us that it's back in the past somewhere, you know? So the Buddha would just not disagree. That can be helpful. Of course it can. But he would just say we're missing the main point. The main point is, so let's say, you know, in my relationship with Fred, always get angry, always get jealous, feel depressed, get unhappy, blame easily, whatever. Then the Buddha's view, which is not an easy one, because it demands I start to look into my own thoughts. He's basically saying, yeah, Fred might be a creep. Fred might be a peanut. You've chosen a really dumb guy there, Robina. He says maybe that's possible. There are terrible, in fact, it's true. The world is full of really suffering people at the hands of really other suffering people. There's no question suffering occurs. But the Buddha's deal is this. That he says maybe you can change the outside. Maybe you can ask Fred to be different. How fantastic. But if he can't, if he can't change, then what are your options? This sounds very clinical, but it's profoundly true. My option is I say, bye Fred, or I start to change my mind. And I found this very powerful when I think of the people I work with in prison. Since 1996, when I was based in the Bay Area, I was editing a Buddhist magazine, the magazine of the organisation that I'm part of. And in 96, I got a letter from this young Mexican-American from Los Angeles, Arturo. He was in this top security prison right in the northern California on the border of Oregon, in a place called prison called Pelican Bay, which is sort of one of the first where they had this permanent lockdown scenarios, which used to be considered against human rights, but now are quite common in the prisons, not just in this country, where the inmates are in their cells 23 hours a day in two-man cells, or sometimes in one-man cells, you know. So Arturo told me he was in this particular cell. He was sent there from other prisons because he was part of the gangs. I mean, the gang mentality runs the prison, especially California. I mean, I learned so much, it was unbelievable. He told me he'd been in prisons, in gangs since he was 11, in prison since he was 12, tried as a juvenile, then 16 tried as an adult and was given 3 life sentences. Not for murder. I mean, we know that sentencing, I think, isn't Jerry Brown's our governor, isn't he now? I think he's doing some, I think they're trying to change a few things in the prisons. So many of the inmates apparently were, tried, Arturo as an example, tried as adults when they were juveniles, so they're trying to change that. But there's this really kind of, which I think is not what's in California now, but it was upheld many years ago in a referendum, what they called the 3 strikes. You know, where you're sentenced and sentenced for the 3rd time for a felony. It could be stealing a video, mandatory life sentence. That still occurs, but they're trying to change things a bit, which I think is fantastic. Anyway, this young man, caught up in this scenario in the gangs, he was in this permanent lockdown situation. We're in their cell 23 hours a day with another inmate. They're allowed to have 10 books, no hardback because you could whack your cellie, and the inside of a pen, because you could, kind of the hard part, you could stab your cellie. No hot drinks, they drink Kool-Aid because you tip it on your cellie. Anyway, whatever, not so cool, these places. So he was nothing else to do in his 23 hours a day, and being a young, intelligent man with a good heart, you know, read some Buddhist books, and so wrote. I got a letter from him, you know, 96, and he was the first person to write. Within a year, I had 40 people writing. And then I ran it for about 15 years. It became known as Liberation Prison Project. It still exists, a non-profit, but in Australia as well. But a colleague of mine in Sydney now runs it. So it was a very powerful experience for me. You know, I don't have contact with people in prison, fortunately, for myself. But we just started to get these letters. We got at some point 1,000 letters a month from people in prisons all over the States and in Australia. And our main program was to give them mentors to write to, but also to give books. Because most of these young men, you know, this is the typical in most countries, this is the laws, all about street crime. You know, 99% of the working class, I'd say, uneducated, gangs, nobody, nothing. It's not uncommon. There's an old guy in Virginia I'm going to visit a couple of weeks. He's not 75, been in prison for 25 years, he's Italian. He said he's had one visitor in 25 years. He's never received a cent from anybody in 25 years. This is not uncommon. The kind of life it's very fascinating. So for me, it was a very powerful experience dealing with these human beings who have a heart, who have a mind, and they would write to us. I mean, the psychos don't write to us. And there are plenty of psychos in prison, but probably more out, we know that. But they would not write, you know. So these young men would hear about this and want some books, and we'd send books. And because they had nothing and nobody, 100 people would read one little book, you know, because they were so hungry for something. So anyway, Arturo wrote, and what I found most moving over the years, and still do, I have contact with about 20 of them. I see some of them and visit and send my, you know, photocopy my blogs and send books and things. The thing that I found so moving is because in these situations, especially when you're in a dire situation, you can hardly pick your nose in peace. There's no freedom. You won't get out alive. There is nothing in worldly terms to look forward to. Well, you have two options, again. You can't have the option of leaving, like I would with Fred. So they have even less options. You go mad, or you change your mind. So somehow the Buddhist tools, which are these, about knowing your mind and giving you the skills to do it, which is an intensely hard job, but when your back's against the wall, we all know that. When you really have no other choice, then that drives us, you know, to do what's most difficult. And another example, so powerful, one particular example, this woman, I didn't actually meet her, but I read her biography a few years ago. She was in Florida on death row. She was hitching in a little hippie lady with a hippie husband, 3 hippie kids, hitching in Florida, 30 years ago or something. Got picked up by 2 blokes. The blokes were stopped by the coppers. The blokes killed the coppers and blamed the hippies. So they're thrown onto death row. He's even executed. I mean, you can't even conceive the pain if you think about it, you know. Just being blamed for doing the smallest thing and go nuts. He was even executed. She, you know, imagining in the beginning, this is just insane, of course they're going to discover the truth soon, of course they don't. So eventually she said, and this is what's so amazing, this woman I so admire, I don't think she was a Buddhist, she did yoga and things like this, but this is the point I'm saying. She said, I finally realized I could not change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk, I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. So we know it's so moving, we hear it, you know, but you can just only imagine the intensity, the night of it. And this really essentially is Buddha's point. The fact is, you can hear that Buddha doesn't own this, by the way. He didn't make this up. He's observed this. We all know we do this every day, if we're brave enough. We will refrain from saying those words. Even once a day we might do that. We know we can do this. We know we can change our mind. But this is Buddha's deal. That's his expertise. This is the essence of being a Buddhist, if you do it properly. Saying nice mantras, wearing nice nun's robes, having a bald head, doing prayers, that's not the point. The point, you use those tools if they're helpful for you to go into your own mind and know that you can reconfigure, change it. And that means the cognitive process. It's not to do with changing the brain. It's not to do with changing the physical. You can change that too. Take some pills. Take your serotonin, please. Not a problem. Use it, whatever we do, to enable us to do the actual job of changing our minds, you know. Another story from the prisons, which is, again, quite a shocking point, actually. This is, again, emphasizing Buddha's deal about the necessity to go deep into our own minds and know we can change them. Arturo, in fact, it was he. When we started doing a newsletter, and it was so marvellous for the prisoners because they can't write to each other. So through the newsletter, they discovered each other. They had a community all across this country and in other countries as well. And they would do their art, their poetry, we would give them teachings, and it was really marvellous for them, you know. So they would often write to Lama Zopa, our teacher. having read his teachings in the newsletter. And so he would often write back long letters of advice, and often he would say to them something like this, which for our ears sounds quite patronising, quite shocking, coming from a person in freedom to a person, who's got no freedom. He would say to them, and there's Arturo in his cell, 8 foot by 10 foot, by the way, about the size of a small bathroom. I don't mean toilets, I mean a bathroom with a bathtub maybe. Instead of a bathtub, it's concrete bunks, 1 toilet, 10 books, the inside of a pen, a pad, if you have some money, a television with speakers, and that's your life 23 hours a day with another person. Well, get your best friend. I think you'd kill each other. They kill each other regularly. I think you would kill each other, there's no question, with nothing else. And the noise is like utter insanity. One of them said it's like being in Bedlam all day. Another said it's like being at a rock concert all day. Maybe 3 hours at night when it's slightly peaceful. Living like this year on end. I mean, you've got to have a strong mind, not to go crazy. Which is why the tools we would give many of these inmates I know, I just so admire, really putting their money where their mouths is. So anyway, Lama Zopa said to him, your prison is nothing in comparison with the inner prison of ordinary people. I think that's our category. The prison of attachment, the prison of anger, the prison of jealousy, the prison of depression. And this sounds shocking to us. I mean, not one of us, if we think of suffering, we would tend not to think of ourselves. Even though we might have panic attacks, even though we get depressed, we kind of feel guilty about it, like I shouldn't be, because look at me, I'm a nice person with a nice house, a reasonable hubby, reasonable job, reasonable money, reasonable this, reasonable body. We sort of, there's like kind of a guilt and a shame about it. But this is the Buddhist deal. Once we start to realise this level of suffering, because he would even say that this is the source of the grosser level of suffering. What goes on in the mind, somehow, I remember a friend of mine went off to do a year's retreat in one of these centres in France, a Tibetan Buddhist centre. She did a year, and she went back to New York. She said, Robina, I had to go back, I just began to see my mind. But she did another year, a third year. Now this is insane to us. Well, not quite, maybe we do therapy for 40 years, don't we? But only an hour a day, once a week maybe. But this is like people full-time, on the job, going deep inside. And maybe all this is indicating is the subtlety, as I said before, the subtlety of what goes on in our mind that Buddha would suggest. Most of us might not touch that level in this life, it's okay. It's just sort of making this point. The Buddha's view of the mind goes to astonishing levels of refinement and subtlety. And I'm even talking about the cognitive, the conceptual level too, not some wacky, strange, mystical level. So then the thing then to do if you're trying to be a Buddhist, if you're using Buddhism as I would say, as my working hypothesis, I need to understand Buddha's model of the mind. So that means I need to understand the contents of this mental consciousness, because that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. So we've got these negative states, positive, and these ones that are called neither. They're like the mechanics of the mind. So there's, in other words, in our mind, again, we're not talking the brain, we're talking the actual thought processes, which we know are running like crazy. We know that. From the second we wake up until the second we go to sleep. And we only notice it when they become very loud. And as I said before, for the Buddha, that's way too late. We've got to get deeper inside. So then let's look then at the characteristics, according to the Buddhist model, of these states of mind. So this category called negative is really precise and quite distinct. And it's not how we think in our culture. Like I said, I think in all our models of the mind, we give equal status to attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, love, compassion, and the rest. And as long as you've got a fairly equal balance of those, you're an okay human being. Well, the Buddha's view is more radical, as I'm suggesting. He says we can get rid of the rubbish and we can develop the goodness to astonishing degrees. So that means that I've got to do that. I've got to know what I'm dealing with here, not just some bunch of weird feelings. I've got to go be more precise in knowing how to identify these cognitive processes. So one way you could say is Buddha's a cognitive therapist, changing our thoughts. But like I mentioned, he goes to much subtle levels with thoughts. So okay, the negative ones, what are their characteristics? Well, the Buddhist view is there's like a hierarchy of these, and the root, one of the terms they use for these, which is a bit of a shocking word, is the word delusion. So if you were accused of being delusional, you'd be quite offended. Well, I don't want to shock you here, but Buddha's basically saying, if you've got attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, and all the rest, join the club here, babies, you are delusional. It's just a question of degree. There's another term for these in Buddhist psychology. There's many synonyms for the negative ones, for the unhappy ones. They're in this hierarchy of them. They're called delusions. They're called negative emotions. They're called disturbing emotions. That's pretty clear. Check the last time you were depressed. You don't go, wow, I was depressed yesterday, it was just great. It is deeply disturbing, there is no question. Disturbing emotions, but another really interesting term is afflictive emotions or emotion or mental affliction. If you read the Dalai Lama, that's one of the commonest terms they use in Tibetan. Mental affliction. Well, you look up the dictionary, another word for affliction is illness. Mental illness. That's kind of shocking to us. But Buddha's way of talking, if we use modern words, this is literally what he's saying. We are all delusional. We're all mentally ill. It's just a question of degree. And I'm not being cliched here. I'm not trying to be heavy, I'm not negative. But the way Buddha describes these states of mind, and what he's saying is, instead of, when I was a Catholic, these were called sins, weren't they? No wonder we feel guilty about them. They're called sins. But Buddha doesn't have a term like this. Because he doesn't have a term, he doesn't have a concept of a creator, therefore there's no such thing as punishment or reward. He's basically saying we first have to look into these states of mind, and why do we need to? Because he says they are the ones that are breaking our hearts. They're the ones that make us crazy. They're the ones that make us go nuts. They're the ones that make us get angry and harm each other. They're the ones that start, everything starts from here. So what we call gross suffering, the real suffering, is people who are poor, who kill each other, who are in prison. But that's just the actions of body and speech. Well, where do they come from? From what's in the mind. So the inner prison is the start. But we don't pay attention to it, We don't pay attention to it. So this is the thing we need to then look at the Buddha's view in this hierarchy of these negative states. The root delusion, as they call it. And we don't even have something equivalent in our culture, in our models of the mind at all. It's known, they know it colloquially, it's called ego grasping. And it's this primordial, the Buddha would suggest, mistaken sense of I. A really primordial, fractured, broken, separate, lonely, cut off, empty, unhappy sense of I that's rooted in fear. On the basis of that, we have this thing that is called attachment. This is one of the commonest Buddhist terms. But as Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for a whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until you go deep inside. It's multifaceted. So the most primordial energy of this attachment, which is the main voice of this mistaken sense of self, this neurotic, lonely, bereft, broken sense of self, is this bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. This assumption, we're born with this, and some of us have it more than others, a deep assumption that I haven't got enough, I am not enough, whatever I get it's not enough, whatever I do it's not enough. The default mode is to always be dissatisfied. So naturally on the basis of dissatisfaction, which is the kind of the energy level of attachment, it gives rise to the more overt level of it, which is called hankering after something. Because if you feel you're dissatisfied, you're missing something, aren't you? So naturally you hanker after something, such that when you get it, it'll fill up the gaping hole. Well, the first obvious level of attachment is the objects of the senses. And don't hear this in a punitive way. Just try and see it as practical, So naturally then this neediness goes on to the cakes and the people and the things and the sounds and the smells and the handbags and the houses and whatever. All depending on your style. Some can be alcohol, some can be drugs, some can be money, some can be having a thin body, some can be the food that makes you a fat body. Lama Yeshe would often joke at us Westerners and say, you can never work out what you're more attached to, a thin body or the food. And we know that one for sure. So this is attachment or craving, and it's spontaneous. You don't sort of think a thought, oh, I'd like to be attached. It's primordial, it's spontaneous. And the next function of this attachment, which is the tricky part, to the extent to which it's prevalent in my mind, coming from this dissatisfaction, and then let's say I dump it onto cakes. But what this attachment does is make the cake look way more delicious than it really is. And we know that. Look at how Fred looks when you're in love with him. Completely divine. And so it blinds you to everything else. It's like you've got your rose-coloured spectacles on. That's attachment. And so the other thing that attachment does, which is what makes it so confusing, is it triggers very nice feelings in the body. So altogether, that's what we call becoming happy, And so Buddha's he said it's really quite more nuanced than that. If we observe this attachment, and again I'm not being cliched here, there's a way of saying it in our modern language. It's basically the junkie mind. Again, it's a question of degree. We can see this. We can see this, and we struggle, all of us, with this. This is attachment. Then this is what's interesting. Also, one of its functions is continuous, and you can say one thing about it, it's continuously there, every second, playing underneath. It's not overt. It's at the level of assumption. This feeling of not having enough, this feeling of wanting something more, then looking for something that looks like it'll give it to me when I get it. Then the other function of this attachment is, another way of talking, is that it's a junkie for only the good things. It can only bear the good things. So the millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants, that's called aversion, the bare-bone state of mind called aversion. If that expresses itself outwardly, that's called anger. If it expresses itself inwardly, that's called depression. And this is happening 1 million times a day. And we don't ever pay attention until it's a very powerful level of it, you know. So you wake up in the morning, kind of slightly agitated, slightly dissatisfied. Then everything goes nicely. How'd you go today, Robina? Oh, I had a lovely day. What happened? Well, basically, a lovely day is when attachment gets what it wants. So, you know, the nice breakfast, hubby was kind, he put the toilet seat down, the kids got up on time. You know, the traffic wasn't too bad, the green lights were there when I needed, the boss was kind, people smiled at me in the shop, so you come home, you feel quite perky, you know. So I'm not being mean here, because it's marvellous to have a good day. One of my friends in prison, he was in even an ordinary medium security prison. He had to go to the dentist, they took him into the local town. The nurse said, hello, good morning, and he burst into tears. He never hears kind words. So how amazing to hear kind words, aren't we lucky? So nevertheless, at the other level, this is this neediness to get the nice things. It got the nice things, so we call that happiness. Now look what happens if you had a lousy day. The toilet seat stayed up, the kids didn't get up on time, and it doesn't have to be dreadful things like being accused of killing somebody. Just little baby things, we all know these. The lights were red, the boss was mean, the food was not tasty, the weather was horrible, and by the end of the day we're exhausted and we wonder why. Because the Buddhist deal is this attachment and aversion working at quite subtle levels. We don't deal with this as a problem, I think, in our psychology. We don't even notice it until we start to go deep inside. This is there constantly. We notice it when the aversion is very strong, we get really angry, or really depressed. Then we notice, then we have to do something about it. And then all the other, so in this hierarchy, you've kind of got this ego grasping, this primordial, long, fractured sense of self, lonely, bereft, that craves something that will fill me up and make me feel I'm whole, that then gets upset and angry, frustrated, annoyed, irritated, all polite words for anger when it doesn't get what it wants. And then it gives rise to the jealousy and the other dramas, you know, without being too complicated. This is really, and this stuff, this is the terms Buddha uses, words that we think are so normal. Okay, in our modern world, with psychiatry now, there must be volumes of these complex, as we call them, mental illnesses. Buddha calls these the mental illnesses, and he hasn't changed as much in 2,500 years. So it's kind of interesting, stuff that seems so simple. But with these techniques, and I'm not trying to be thinking Buddha's so special, well, I think I like Buddha, I'm a fan, clearly. But you know, that he goes to great depth in the understanding of these states of mind. And the crucial point is it's beyond the emotional component. It's when you calm the emotional component down, which is already a pretty intense, hard job to do, then you can begin to hear the cognitive process, the conceptual story. Anger is a conceptual story. Attachment is a conceptual story. Jealousy, low self-esteem, but they're hard to hear because they're at the level of assumption. So it's really unpacking these assumptions, each of which is underpinned by a subtler assumption. So it's not an easy job, but this is the job. So if I'm trying to be a decent Buddhist, and I've got, you know, a friend makes me angry yet again, you understand? Then what I would do is do this work of going into my own mind, checking the anger, listening to the story. What is anger saying, Robina? Seeing how it's linked to how my attachment didn't get what it wanted. Looking at my attachment, why do I assume I should get what I want every second? And this stuff's kind of subtle, you know. It doesn't take, it's not going to change overnight. But it's dealing with your own cognitive processes. It doesn't mean you can't ask Fred to change. It doesn't mean you shouldn't leave Fred. Yes, if you have any self-respect, you probably would. But the tragedy, the irony is of all these states of mind, the irony of these voices of ego is they're the ones that make us impotent and hopeless and blaming and victim and fearful and pathetic and useless, you know. We should be crying with compassion for ourselves when we see these states of mind, not feeling guilty. It's the opposite. Because they are what are breaking our hearts. They are what are causing us suffering. And they are what caused me to make a mess of my relationships. So again, it doesn't mean that the outside world doesn't play a role. The Buddha's point is, of course it does. The outside world plays a huge role, but it's not the main cause. This is the main point. And it's intense to have the courage to be like that woman, you know. In our own life, we're not being accused of murdering people on death row. Look how hard it is to look inside and change the thought instead of blaming the other person. I mean, look how hard it is. Because we're not used to it, you know. So it's a seemingly simple job, but intensely difficult. At the same time, I remember reading about that woman on death row. I read about another fellow on death row who was also innocent, and who, and to put it this way, without being unkind, who didn't know he could change his mind. He went completely insane, completely out of his brain, raging every day as long as he had a voice. I did not rape and kill that woman. And that's, we understand it. In our view of the West, we think he's allowed to be angry. The more he's been harmed, the more his anger is reasonable, we think. Yeah, you might be right, he's right. They were both right, they were innocent. But what is the point in being right if you go mad? That's why it takes courage. You know? Even just when someone told you, accuses you of breaking a cup that you didn't break, it's just unbearable for us to accept that, to swallow that, isn't it? Unbearable. We go nuts. So it takes courage. It takes courage. Now this could be also tricky. Let's say you're in a lousy relationship, in a boss or a partner, but you're a victim, you're fearful, you get walked on, you used like a doormat. This is not for you. You need to stand up. You need to say, excuse me, mate, stop, or I'm leaving. But this is the tragedy of the victim one. Anger is also the function of a victim, raging and shouting. It looks strong, but it's like a little kid having a mental breakdown. Or the silent, passive one of the fear, that person needs to stand up. So we've got to know our own mind well enough to know the right way to see it. This is not a question of just being all soupy and peaceful with a big smile on your face, being mindful. Don't misread this, you know. Are we giving you a turn? I think it's your turn now to ask any questions. Come on. Any old questions you'd like? Yes. No, don't say that. It's okay. I'll hear you, sweetheart. Yes. Okay, good. It's a very good question. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, there's this lovely analogy that I actually quote a lot, and I haven't said it yet. In Buddhism, a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So it's a way of actually framing all the stages of the path in Buddhism. That you could argue that the compassion wing is finally the point. But as the Dalai Lama often says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. So the wisdom wing, is like what we just talked about here, knowing your own mind, certainly the view of karma. For a Buddhist, you look into this business, which is what informs you in this life. Understanding your own self deeply and well and sorting yourself out. You understand? That's the basis. And it's only the person who's got the wisdom wing together to some extent who can be genuinely, appropriately compassionate. In other words, the person who's got let's say a scenario of a person who's got lots of neediness and fear and low self-esteem, but not an aggressive person. That person would have, we've all got this enormous attachment, more subtle than anything for most of us. We have this desperate need to be seen in a good light. So you get a person who's victim, who's fearful, who's quiet, who's passive, but also very kind. They've got the good qualities, But their attachment would be so desperate to be seen as a nice person, that's the enabler. And that's a disaster, and that's the commonest, that's the typical one of parents, that's the typical one in relationships. It's a nightmare, that one. And that's why it's quite a subtle job to know your own mind, to know what's beneficial, to know how to be. So commonly our way of being compassionate is, let's say I've got an alcoholic brother. We're all worried about the brother. We think about him being an alcoholic. We wish he wasn't an alcoholic. We give him advice all the time. So what's happening here is two things. There is compassion, there's no doubt. But because my attachment to have everything nice doesn't like, the alcoholic brother's a pain in the it's making me crazy. It makes my life upset. So my attachment doesn't like it. So it then pollutes the compassion and makes me sound like I'm trying to be very kind. But it causes me to freak out. I don't like his being an alcoholic brother. Whereas if I had less neurosis and less attachment and therefore more courage, my compassion would be more genuine, and I'd mind my own business in a more appropriate way. You don't always stick your nose in other people's business when you've got less attachment. Are you seeing what I'm saying? I said, attachment. This is, again, like I said, it's multifaceted. So all the words we use in the West, this is attachment: control freak, expectations, possessiveness, codependent. These are wonderful terms all functions in this particular state of mind that Buddha would refer to as attachment, this bottomless piece of neediness, and wants only the nice things. Because I want everything to be nice, that includes my brother not being an alcoholic. So the neediness, neurotic part of me wishes it all go away. The compassion is genuine, but it's polluted by that part. So if I've done the wisdom wing, I've got less attachment, therefore more reasonable, therefore less freaked out about it. And I want to help him, but I can't force him to change. Therefore, I would love him for who he is and be content. Do you see what I'm saying? So then when you've got all this neediness for him to be lovely and to be seen as a nice person, then it's a mess. Mothers' compassion for their children is a mess, you know. It's not compassion. It's completely polluted by all this possessiveness and everything. Are we communicating? Yeah. Somebody else? Yes.
You spoke of, you started the talk with telling a story about a cake and then recipes to make the cake. And so you created this beautiful story. And so my question is about recipes to accomplish.
Okay, well, basically, what I'm describing here is Buddha's view of the problem, of what causes our suffering, which is the neuroses in our mind. Yeah? And I made the statement that he says that they're not set in stone, and that our job is to, by knowing our own minds, to unpack and unravel and change them, and therefore necessary to grow the good part of us. That's what we've been discussing here, right? So, therefore, isn't that implying already the solution? Isn't it? It doesn't. It's actually stating the problem is implying the solution. So this being your own therapist, okay, let's put it in a more simple way, how it would start, a good starting point. Well, the first step has to be that, wow, that sounds interesting. I wouldn't mind being less neurotic, less depressed, less angry, less jealous. And wow, you mean I can do it myself? That's interesting. So you've got to have that sort of the possibility. But you've got to be in for the long haul, because it won't change overnight, and part of our problem is we want it to change overnight, you know. So that's the first step. But then, you know, if you're taking the Buddhist view here, that would mean the first thing you'd do is you'd start developing this technique called concentration meditation. It would be a good start. And that would mean you'd wake up in the morning, before you go to the coffee, before you maybe you pee first, before you go to the coffee, you understand? You'd have a little spot where you'd sit, and I'm talking sitting for 3 minutes, okay? Don't exaggerate, you think it's going to be an hour. And you start with 3 minutes, you'd close your eyes, and you'd talk to yourself, and you just say, okay, for 3 minutes, I'm going to make an effort to pay attention to my breath. Not because the breath is holy, it just happens anyway, it's natural. So you can anchor your mind to it. And for 3 minutes you're going to pay attention, which means you're going to make an effort not to follow all the thoughts. Of course you will follow the thoughts, and then you bring yourself back to the breath. And then you pick yourself up and you bring yourself back to the breath again. And then 3 minutes you stop. Now, nothing's going to change. Nothing. It's like doing anything. You go to the gym for the first time. In fact, you might think you're getting worse. You come home and you've discovered muscles you didn't know you had. Or say here, you'll spend 3 minutes thinking, my God, my mind's berserk. It is. So that's the first step. And you just keep doing it. Then slowly, I can even say in a simple way, the beginnings of the use of this technique, of the application of it in your daily life, because you're paying attention to something, and you're consciously trying to refrain from following the thoughts mindlessly. You understand? That's what's happening. You're not expecting any vision, there's no mystical thing going to happen, it's just hard work and kind of boring, you understand? But what happens is, slowly, what you begin to do, you bring this skill to bear, you're driving the car, where normally you just sort of, you're feeling kind of nice or whatever, you're just observing, but not really observing what's going on, you're only observing the cars. And then suddenly a car leaps in front of you, and then out come the swear words, and freak out and get angry and upset. But if you start to do this, what you're beginning to bring to bear in your daily life is the ability to notice your thoughts before they come out of the mouth. It takes time though. Depends on the kind of person you are. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're learning this new skill. And excuse me, we do this in a sense already all the time, but this particular way that Buddha has developed it. And it's not rocket science, you can invent it, it just runs with this technique. And it's the ability to step out of your head, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and be humble. 3 or 4 minutes is a good start. But with no expectations of anything dramatic to happen. You're training yourself to step out of the chaos, and so naturally you can't help it out of the side of your eye. You've got to notice it all. And that's the point. So inevitably, it gets worse in a sense before it gets better. Because you've got to notice all the thoughts that you didn't notice until they vomited out the mouth. You've got to say, and as you get progressing in this, you're going deeper and deeper. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is a practical way to apply it. And like anything, it is discipline. And slowly. So of course the person who's going into the Buddhist one will then study the Buddhist model and do it more and have other practices to support you doing this. But this is the essential thing. This is the main thing. But let me tell you something else which sounds a bit sort of boring. Before you really can begin to do that, you've got a sort of entry-level junior school into Buddhism is like doing what your grandmother said. Please behave nicely. So don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't jump on every person you feel like, don't eat too many cakes. Not for a punitive reason, because if we can see that what drives those actions is the neuroses in the mind. Is it not? They're not, you don't kill out of love. You don't eat cake out of being content. You don't say words that are mean about other people because you love them. I mean, they come from anger and fears and ordinary stuff, you know. So as long as I keep vomiting out every thought I have and do every action I feel like, we all know that. You're just going to keep feeding those parts of your mind. So if your job is to finally get to become your own therapist, you've got to first control your body and speech. It seems really kind of simplistic, but it's quite profound. I mean, my family is a typical example. We're 7 siblings, okay? We're all born very close together, so it was just chaotic. All speedy like me, all busy, 7 girls and a boy, and always fighting, like normal siblings do. Then as we got older, we come in our own lives, we come back for Christmas, then we'd all fight. So like natural. But you know what it's like in families, you build up this history with each other, you feel pain. I talk to Polly about Janet, and Judy criticises me to Julie, and it just builds up this, and then look at the schism that happen in families, it's unbearable. Or at work, you can't wait to get home and talk about that colleague. We do so much drama with our mouths. You don't go to prison for bad-mouthing people. So we don't think it's a problem. And we don't realise the harm that we're doing to ourselves. And I really mean this sincerely. So with my family, as we all got older, over the years, we've really made this conscious decision. 2 things. We're all completely different. They all can't stand religion. We're all ex-Catholics. They can't bear religion. They sort of don't mind Buddhism, but don't ask me about it. But we don't talk about things we disagree with, and we don't talk about each other behind our backs. So the result is we have such sweetness between us, such harmony, because we protected our, we build up so much junk. It seems so simple, but it's really quite profound. And I'm not just saying be like Pollyanna. I'm not live in like fantasy world. I'm not saying that. But every time we badmouth, forget who you're harming. You're stirring up your own anger. You're stirring up your own misery. So how can you sit down and meditate? How can you sit down and focus? Not possible. So this is quite profound, really. Try and control our behaviour. You sort of do what your grandma says, behave nicely. And it's got powerful benefit. And so one of the interesting points that Buddha takes, psychologically, is his crucial point, his central point, is the first recipient of the results of what I do and say and think is me, not others. That whatever I think and do and say necessarily brings consequences to me. So if we can have some compassion for ourselves, this is not meant to be again guilty. If I really know I can be less neurotic and less fearful and less jealous and more content, I should have this wish to be that for myself. So therefore, for my own sake, I won't badmouth. For my own sake, I won't stuff too many cakes in. For my own sake, I won't kill and jump on too many particles, Do you understand? This is really quite profound, actually. But it's not out of guilt, and we're very used to hearing this in a moralistic way. It's out of kindness to oneself. Truly, and this takes time. So I think we love to criticise ourselves. My mother used to say, we are our own worst enemy, We all recognise that. We always go to the bad side, isn't it? As soon as anything happens, we criticise ourselves. It's quite profound, and it's the irony of ego in Buddhism. So we have to consciously try and change that too. So this is out of compassion for ourselves that we would try to do this. Does that make sense? What else? Any other questions? Yes.
Can other people's thoughts affect us without us realizing it?
Oh, sweetheart, I think we're incredibly affected by each other. Yes, of course we are. But I think, keep the microphone for a second. Keep the microphone. I think that one of the problems there, the Buddhist view would be, because we are not paying attention to what's happening here, we're always, and we actually don't realise that we have this very strong neediness for everything out there to be nice, and we want the nice feedback. So we're actually it's actually coming from our own lack of self-confidence and kind of neediness to be seen in a good way, that we're very easily affected by each other. I mean, at the extreme level, that's paranoia. We've all got a tendency to this. So the more you do this work of becoming, of knowing your own mind, doing some focus every day, seeing your own qualities, taking responsibility for them, the more stable and content you become in yourself, and the less vulnerable to other crazy stuff. That's definite.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
And then our compassion is much more stable, because the world is a crazy place. It is appalling. There's so much suffering. But right now, it makes us, we can't stand it. It's the same, we're too sensitive to it, because we just can't stand it. But if we put ourselves together a bit, we realise the suffering, we do what we can, but we don't go nuts. We stay kind of optimistic, and that's really important.
Because I'm an empath and I pick up a lot of stuff.
This is very common. And so this is where the compassion without wisdom is a disaster.
Exactly.
It can make us crazy. It can drag us down. The wisdom wing kind of puts iron into our compassion. Do you understand?
Yes.
I mean, I learned that a lot working with people in prison. The suffering's unbearable. I'm not trying to be dramatic. You know, it's not a lifestyle you would choose, believe me. You know? You're the scum of the earth. These sentences, these young men, I'd be in tears sometimes. 30-year sentences, you know, the smallest thing, good human beings. And you could be overwhelmed by it. And I realised it was almost like insulting them for me to feel sorry for them. But if I had techniques and I had skills to give them to help themselves, then it was like dignified and appropriate. And when I walked out of that prison, it didn't drag me down. Do you understand?
Right, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Somebody else? Any old question at all? Yes.
So if we're going to be our own therapist, I'd like to go back for just a minute to the body and the connection there.
Yes.
What does the Buddhist technology say about injury when someone is physically injured?
Absolutely, I understand. Well, what's really interesting, if I look now at the more esoteric model of the physiology and psychology in Buddhism, which is known as Buddhist Tantra, or the Vajrayana model, which actually is coming again from the Hindus, and which is yoga is based on that. This really interesting, quite different model from ours, of course, sophisticated understanding of the subtler physical energies and their intimate relationship with the mind. Clearly, it's not the same as how we talk, you know. And they, like we did back in the Middle Ages, talk about the physical universe, including our body being made of the 4 elements. You understand? We don't use that model now. But it's their understanding of the mind, and the Tibetan medical system is based on this, which is very similar to the Chinese one. So basically, your Tibetan doctor, she'll feel your pulses, and what she's feeling is the movement of all the different wind energies, or the prana, and they're very articulate about this. And all of those different wind energies have an intimate relationship with our different states of mind. So they can feel certain winds that are impacted by anger, and they can by attachment. They can assess all that, you know. So naturally, because the body and the mind are intimately, inextricably linked, and because, you know, it's so easily the tiniest pinprick can disturb our mind, can't it? So it's obvious that the body plays a role. The Buddhist view in general is as we get very advanced, we can completely transform our mind, and the body finally won't be affected, and that's highly advanced. But for most of us, it's natural when the body is distressed, when the body is suffering, or if we say, when the chemicals are out of whack, you need your serotonin to calm them down. You take your Prozac, or you take your depression pills, or whatever they are, you know, or you take a drug to calm the pain down. So pain is what it is. But the Buddha's view is finally, and we don't hold our breath for this one, the mind can eventually overcome all of that. But that's really advanced. It's not meant to be cosmic. It's really advanced. So we have to take care of the body. There's no question. But the point again is that, you know, the Buddhist approach would be depression, for example, is an internalized aversion. It's sort of thwarted attachment, day after day, things not going well. So instead of anger, which would be my style in life, I'd shout and yell and kick. That's easy to recognise. But one of my sisters, for example, didn't shout and yell and kick. It went in and became kind of inert, which is depression. So we can see, you can take certain drugs that affects that. But the Buddhist view would be, you go to your Tibetan doctor, she would diagnose a certain problem. She would give you certain herbs which would shift the physical energies, which in turn affect the mental energy. So it's the same principle as taking the serotonin, but they'd use herbs instead. But nevertheless, the Buddhist approach would be, when your body is more stable, your mind's more stable, then you really can work on the mind itself, and eventually even can heal the physical. Eventually. Again, don't hold our breath. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Somebody else? Any other question?
Could you clarify the Buddhist belief or explain reincarnation according to Buddhism?
Okay.
There's lots of
I will. There's lots of views about it. I'll try and do it in a nutshell. I will. Okay. Just while I speak fast. Okay. So the Buddhist deal is, what's your name? Pam. Okay, we use Pam as our little story here. Okay, there's Pam. So basically what Buddha's saying is Pam's thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, all this is her mind, okay? So think of this as a river of mental moments, and you've got your physical energy, and they're linked together, but they're separate entities, okay? So we track it right back, and we all know that if you keep going back, you were in your mummy's womb at some point, weren't you? Right? And so then the Buddha would say for sure that was what's happening, this little person growing, and then, then we get back to the first second of conception, right? Well, that would be when the egg and sperm come together. Now, the Buddha's view is, going backwards, going back to the past, the continuity of this consciousness which we label now Pan and the body together, we get back to that first second of conception. The second before conception, the egg was in mummy's body, as we know, and the sperm was in daddy's body, and there was no thought of Pan. But she didn't come out of nowhere. We can track this continuity of consciousness back, obviously at a subtle level. They discuss it in great detail in literature. And a few weeks before that, that consciousness was in another body. Okay? So that we can deduce from your being a human that you had a relatively peaceful death, and even before you stopped breathing, the whole death process is described in great detail. Around about the time before you stopped breathing, various things were going on, and what was triggered was a very powerful, as they would say, a seed. Okay, the view of karma is basically, it's the law of cause and effect. As far as the Buddha is concerned, this is a natural law. He didn't make it up. He says it runs the universe, but it's what goes on in the mind. So every second of whatever Pan now is experiencing, 4 things. 1, her human body is the fruit of past actions that Pan did. 2, her tendencies, her personality traits, her qualities. Maybe, you're good at music, you're good at football, you're good at anger, you're good at kindness, you're good at compassion. All your tendencies, intellectual, artistic, emotional, they're all your tendencies. Your experiences, the mummy and daddy you had, how they treat you, how they see you, they love you, they hate you, somebody rapes you, somebody gives you $1 million, all your experiences at the hands of others. And finally, even the way the physical world impacts upon you. These are the 4 ways as they would say, our past actions ripen in the present. So Buddha's saying every millisecond what Pam experiences is the fruit of things that her mind has done in the past, which has impelled her actions of body and speech, which leaves seeds in the mind that don't go astray. Everything we think and do and say stays in the mind. We drag them around, and it's like big bank vaults of different tendencies. So back there, at the time before you stopped breathing, you had all these bank vaults of these different karmic seeds from countless lives, Buddha says. And a virtuous karmic seed from strong practice of morality, which is non-killing, non-harming, probably practiced in the context of a spiritual path, which gives that practice great potency. That karmic seed would have been triggered, which is even before you stop breathing, they say, which then already you're programmed to go to, what's your mummy's name? What's your mummy's name?
Oh, Emily.
And what's your daddy's name?
William.
And I presume William and Emily were hanging out together, were they? You weren't conceived in a petri dish or anything? Old-fashioned method? So there's Emily and William, and there's Pam, before she's even met the other life, okay, Pam? This person, maybe your friend or somebody. This karmic seed was triggered, which you had planted as morality, that programmed you to go to Emily's womb. Second was also triggered all the seeds that would become your personality. Not one atom of your personality has come from your parents, Buddha would say. They might share them, but they've got them because they were good at them before, and you've got them because you were good at them before, and you come together nicely. The third set of karmic seeds which were triggered were all these, they call them experiences similar to the cause, which is all the stuff we experience in relation to other beings. So all the mummy, the daddy, the mummy we have, the cockroaches that, shit in your spoon drawer, the rats that eat your house, the good people, the bad people who are mean to you, kind to you. Karma is very personal, Buddha says. We've got strong history with each other. So then the 4th set of seeds that I triggered at the time of your death is what they call environmental karma, which is the very physical world you occupy, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, whether the food is healthy, unhealthy, whether you've got allergy to peanuts, whether you've got a healthy body. All of these millions of karmic seeds which will literally produce this new person that we know as Pan. And this consciousness, with those seeds programmed, runs like a magnet when she finally leaves this body, the past body, and runs like a magnet into mummy's egg, into the new egg and sperm. So they're just lying there minding their own business, baby, and you came along, fully programmed. As the Buddha is saying, every sentient being in the universe, this is just how it is. dogs, ants, rats, humans, and there are many kinds of beings we can't see. And the Buddha would say this law of karma runs the universe. No one's up there pulling the strings, there's no creator, there's no punishment, there's no reward. All our suffering comes from negative actions, and all our happiness comes from virtuous actions. But it's not a moralistic concept because it's not punishment and reward, because there's no one running the show. We run the show. Big surprise, we are the cause of who we are, Buddha says. We created our own selves. That's the essence of it. Does that make sense? Okay.
Could you say all that again really slowly? I almost got that.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for being here. My question is that it's really common today for people to describe themselves as spiritual
Yes.
versus religious.
Yes.
And I would be really interested in hearing what your thoughts are on what really is spiritual.
No, I understand. I understand. Well, you know, as you can see here, okay, the karmic one is, it doesn't sound like psychology, but for the Buddha it's psychology. It's how the mind works, you know. So he would call that psychology. He didn't use that word then because he didn't speak Greek, did he? They spoke Hindi or Pali or Sanskrit or something. So it's our word for when you're dealing with the mind. Well, so this idea of karma for the Buddha is done by the mind. So technically you could argue a Buddhist is a person who's working on their own mind, including applying the view of karma, which sounds like quote unquote a belief system. But the idea is, the Buddhist view is, you know, it's what I say. I never say I believe in Buddhism. What I'm saying is, and I mean it sincerely, I'm using Buddhist model of the mind, the one of karma, the one of this one I was describing about the mind. This is my working hypothesis, and I like to say it that way, which puts the responsibility on me to work with it, understand it, and verify it, rather than just, oh, I believe in it, you know, which is a bit intellectually lazy. So you could argue, well, first of all, you ask me Tibetan, are you religious? That's how, of course I am. But our view, I think, in our creator religions, assume religion equals creator, whereas not for the Buddhists, because he doesn't assert a creator. So you could argue that Tibetans would say they're religious, but also they might use the word that they know they're working on their mind. So that these two come together in Buddhism, that's all. So I would say, I don't use the word religious much, but we don't use it in our culture much, because it infers believing in a creator, which is not the Buddhist view. So I say spiritual is, okay, put another way, if you're being, basically the bottom line for the Buddha, if you're being a nice person, kind, loving, compassionate, try not to kill, lie, steal, you can be a communist. I don't care, but that's what he would mean by spiritual, being a good person, not harming others. That's the bottom line. Not a question of believing in something, not a question of thinking of a past life or a future life. It's more being a good person, practicing morality, ethics basically. That, I think that's almost equivalent to spiritual. But it depends, if people, you know, have a different view. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Was it too fast? Are we communicating, people?
Yeah.
Okay, what other questions? Yes.
I'm just curious if you could say more about parenting and attachment.
Parenting.
Yes.
Oh, darling, what a minefield. People think it's hard being a Buddhist nun. Believe me, it's easy, you know, I promise. In comparison. I mean, I really mean that with such respect. I mean, I just think, yeah, because you see, okay, this attachment, it underpins all the other dramas. In the Buddhist view, it's really subtle. It's the assumption, it's desperate to get what it wants all the time, and it's desperate to get the nice things. Think of it this way. We've all got it, you know, don't feel guilty. Join the club here. We've all got it, and it's primordial. So then you've got that. So one of the functions of attachment is to make the object look way more delicious than it really is. Now, is that not exactly how mothers feel about their babies? I mean, you'll see a million babies and you'll see yours shining with light around like a halo. You'll recognise it immediately. Because your baby is truly, and just as well, I'm glad my mother had attachment for me. She would have killed me otherwise. Do you understand? So in a sense, I'm not joking here. Why do you think mothers do kill their babies? Because they don't have much attachment for them. And of course, they don't have much love either. But can you imagine? Okay, so attachment is this part of our mind that's, again, multifaceted. We can't even imagine an experience, the way Buddha talks, without it. So it's quite subtle. It drives us. It's the one that plans, it's thinking this, wanting that. It gets excited. It goes up and down like yo-yos when it doesn't get what it wants. It leads to depression and anger when it's thwarted. So it's really quite subtle, and it informs all of our other things, including our good qualities. So you can put it like this. If you're a person with lots of this attachment, you have a baby, but you've got lots of love, lots of patience, lots of generosity, lots of compassion, they're the second group of states of mind. They're the good ones, right? Well, they're your saving grace. If you've got a lot of those, you won't be overwhelmed by the attachment. You'll be able to have the tough love. You'll be wise. You'll do the right thing for that child. But if you've got masses of attachment and neediness and not much wisdom, you'll make a mess. Because you'll be manipulating, you'll possess them as yours, you'll manipulate to get them to do what you want, you'll be angry with them. You know, all the dramas we know that mothers and fathers do when they've got, that's coming from this neurotic attachment. So it's a struggle, because it's the part that makes them divine, you think about them all the time. But the love and the compassion and the wisdom, that's the part that has to grow, and that's the part that makes you a good parent. Are you kind of with me a bit?
Yes, thank you.
Huh? What?
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
and it's not easy, because this stuff all runs together, you know. It's not as if you have 5 minutes of pure attachment, then 5 minutes of pure love. No way. They come together, you know. And it's the same with all relationships, and also with things. You can like chocolate cake. There's nothing wrong with liking chocolate cake. Enjoying chocolate cake is a perfectly human, reasonable thing to do. But it's the attachment to something that makes the problem. So I'll give an example. You know, let's say you and I, what's your name? Laurie. Let's say Laurie and I like chocolate cake. Oh, great, let's go have some chocolate cake. We just look like we enjoy chocolate cake. We'll go to the cafe, we'll order chocolate cake. But look what happens when we get carrot cake instead. This is the point. Let's say Laurie goes, oh, I can handle carrot cake, and she proceeds to enjoy it. Let's say I go, excuse me, I want a chocolate cake, I get all upset. Your response proved you didn't have much attachment. My response proved I had lots of attachment. That's what attachment is. It sets itself up, it's very rigid, it expects it, it wants it, and then it freaks out when it doesn't get it. We recognise that. But not so much attachment. You still can like it, and really like chocolate cake best, but your mind's flexible enough that you're prepared to accept the carrot cake. That's a sign that I had masses of attachment. Do you understand? You can see that. And often then you can't see attachment until it doesn't get what it wants. That's the problem. If your baby behaves beautifully every minute, you'll be in bliss. But the minute it starts crying and yelling and, you know, doing the wrong things, that's when you get distressed, because that's when attachment isn't getting what it wants. And that's when you have to make the effort to be patient, to be kind. Do you understand? Do you understand?
I do, and I was thinking, like, with my teenage boys, the attachment, it looks like I want for them.
Yes.
But I think it really is an attachment, wanting something for myself.
And it is also, it is that, I mean, okay, you can say the compassion is the good part, you want it for them. That's not attachment. Your compassion and your love is, the Buddhist definition of love is the delight that someone else is happy and the wish they be happy. That's love. May you be happy, sweetheart. And compassion is empathy with their suffering. You've got that. That's fantastic. That gives you the wisdom to see them objectively, to know what's best for them, but your neediness for everything to go nicely, because attachments can't bear the bad things. It's a junkie, it only wants the nice things. That's why we have panic attacks when things go wrong. That's when we over-defend the child, we freak out and worry about things. That's attachment. You see, the thing is, it's so subtle, this attachment. We shouldn't think, oh, I should give it up. It's primordially deep. And it's quite precise and quite unique the way Buddhism describes it. Not the way we talk in the West at all. One of the characteristics of all the neuroses is they're fear-based. They're fear-based in their nature. Ego grasping, the root delusion, which gives rise to attachment, which gives rise to anger, which gives rise to the others, they're all fear-based. Well, that's why you think we have panic attacks every day. Anxiety, that's fear. It's the nature of all these neuroses, and we think it's normal. This is why it sounds so shocking. The Buddha would say when you really develop spiritually in this work we're talking here, and you've even radically lessened these neuroses and not got rid of them yet, you wouldn't have fear. You'd be blissful, radiant, clear, optimistic, self-confident, wise, kind, courageous. They are our real nature. And this other stuff drags us down to hell, you know. So way to go. Yes. Yes. Don't be pet. Yes, 1 second. Yes.
Because you talked about death and reincarnation.
Yes.
Can you just talk about death?
Yes.
If you have no children, your gene pool is not being passed on.
Yes.
Some people believe, heaven and hell. Some people believe the lights are out, curtains down, and
I understand. Yes.
Can you give me your take just on
I absolutely will. Yes, I will. So it's interesting. The last few years I've been working. One of my jobs is to edit books, and I worked on the book of one of our teachers called Lama Zopa, and it's now actually been downloaded free as a PDF. It's being published later on as a hardback. But it's, I called it, it's a bit shocking, but this is typical Buddhist view. It's called How to Help, it's all referring to how to help your loved ones. You know, all the different processes and what practices to do, how to help before, the months and weeks before you die, the day at the time of death, when the breathing stops, the days after death. It's a whole kind of, it's like a handbook for Buddhists, you know. It's very interesting for non-Buddhists to read it because it gives you the Buddhist view. And so it's called, I called it, How to Help Your Loved Ones Enjoy Death and Go Happily to Their Next Rebirth. It sounds kind of wacky for us. So because the Buddhist view, and I'm just telling you the Buddhist view, you don't have to believe it, you know, but the Buddhist view is that your consciousness goes back and back and back and will necessarily continue. It doesn't you're not created by somebody else, you don't begin from nowhere, but you're a product of your past, and what you do now produces your future. Dalai Lama often says it's like the Buddhist view is like self-creation. Do you understand that concept? So then the Buddhist view is necessary. Your mind goes back and will continue no matter what. No matter what. And we can take all kinds of forms. So our being human is the result, like I mentioned with Pan, is the fruit of just getting a human body is the fruit of phenomenal virtue and goodness. We must have practiced really hard in a past life. Now clearly, Hitler had one of those bodies as well. He was a human too. But these other karma, there's like 4 tracks of karma, as I mentioned. The second one is your tendencies. We can clearly look by looking at Hitler, he had wacko tendencies. You understand? Weird habits. Then he had, you know, so we've got all these different karmic imprints. So the Buddha says we are the ones who produce that. So the human body is the fruit of past virtue, and the best one for the Buddha would say, we use this human life to continue to practice morality. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, and then eventually try to be kind and wise and work on your mind and develop your marvelous potential. So that when you do die, you program yourself. You can die with a happy mind, because karma, he says, is a natural law. You don't have to cross your fingers and hope for the best, because there's no concept of a creator rewarding you or punishing you. You bring your own results. So then you can die with a happy mind, you'll keep on bopping in another human life and keep on bopping on your spiritual path. I mean, roughly, is the Buddhist view. That's great. Did you follow me? Did I say it too quickly? Oh, darling, I'm sorry. Did you get that out? Did you get the idea though? That all consciousness, all rats, humans, animals, all men, and he would assert other beings as well that we can't see, like spirits and all kinds of other beings, very suffering beings. There's trillions of beings, the Buddha would say, and every one of us is experiencing the fruits of our past actions. And every one of us can sow seeds now that will produce our future. So it's up to us, the Buddha's view is. So Buddha, yes, by default, our consciousness will continue, according to him. I'm not asking you to believe it, I'm just telling you the Buddha's view.
So when you have a dream of somebody who's passed over, is it a dream or is it a coinky-dink or what is it? Or you say, oh, I got a sign where I felt the presence of my mother.
No, I understand. I mean, the Buddha would say all consciousnesses will continue, and they're going to be in different types of experiences. And because in our dream mind, that's the more subtle level of our mind. Our dream mind is much more subtle, isn't it? And they describe this again in great detail in the Buddhist literature. They talk about gross consciousness, which is how we function day to day in this human body. But then we've got subtle consciousness. So people have clairvoyant experiences, and you can train yourself in this according to Buddhism. When you dream, that's your subtle consciousness, and that doesn't need the brain to function. And the Buddhist, in his meditation techniques, they enable you to go to that subtler level where you can have the ability to see the past, see the future. This is all part of the Buddhist process. It's all laid out in the literature, how to do this, and that we can do this. We've got these much subtler levels. So of course we can have dreams and imagine beings, we can see past, see the future, these things. That all fits with the Buddhist view. Yeah. Yes.
If we are...
Yes, darling.
If our nature is all good, true, positive, then where does all this
rubbish? I know. I understand. It's a really...
true.
I hear you. No, I hear you. I hear you. Okay. So the point that's being said when it says that the goodness is really what defines us, it is our final potential. It doesn't mean we were good once and then like Adam and Eve lost the plot. It's not saying that. It actually sounds a bit weird, but the Buddha's view would be all the negative imprints are there, and you go, okay, this is how it would go. Okay, why am I angry? Well, Robina, guess what? You must have been angry before. Well, why was I angry before? Well, I'm sorry, Robina, you must have been angry before. And you keep asking that question, and you'll never find a first moment of anger. You can't. because that implies that there was a first moment which didn't have a previous cause. So Buddha says our minds are beginningless. I mean, it sounds insane to us. You know, if you're a Christian, you track it all back to God or a source. Okay, I'm not being rude saying these things, I'm not criticising. It's a different view. The Buddha's view is that consciousness goes back and back. So if there's anger and jealousy and fear in our mind now, as well as love and compassion, there are tendencies in our mind. But his point is this. The negative states of mind, and there's too much to talk about it now, we can't, but there's a particular characteristic of them that because they're not valid, because they're neurotic, because they're exaggerations, because they're distortions, we can get rid of them. They're not at the core of our being. He would say that the virtues and goodness and compassion are linked to reality. They are like natural. They're truly natural. Because real natural for the Buddha is when everything is interdependent. Everything works harmoniously. Everything is good and harmonious and interdependent. That's natural. No one made it that way. So when we're fully developed in virtuous qualities and wisdom and kindness, we're in sync with reality, which is interdependence. But the neuroses are neurotic and I-based, and we can remove them. Does that make sense? Do you think?
I think you're saying it's our mind, our ego, that creates.
That's right, precisely. And
For ourselves.
That's right, and we've been creating it for eons, Buddha says, and we can get rid of them.
Right.
Which is the job. Which is a tough job, but yeah. Yes. Somebody behind over here, somebody had their hand up. Just somewhere. No? Oh, sorry. Won't be long. Wait a minute, like. We have to get. What time do we have to get out of here? 9 o'clock. Okay. Yes.
Well, thank you for coming to see us.
Pleasure.
I've been looking forward to seeing you.
Good.
Could you give some examples of what to look for in a good Buddhist teacher? And you and I know each other. There was a group of us here that were part of the Sangha in Claremont.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I'm Bridget.
Yes. You must come talk to me later.
Yes.
All of you.
And so,
Who are you then?
I'm Bridget.
Bridget. Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
Happy to meet you.
Yes.
Good job.
And so there's been a group of us that have left without a teacher suddenly.
I
And
understand.
we've sort of been drifting around.
I understand.
And we know that you have to leave. So could you give some examples
I understand.
of what a good teacher is?
I do understand. It's a really interesting point, this one. I think especially in the West where it's a minefield. And I'm not saying anything about anybody we know, I'm just talking in general. But somehow, in Tibet it was 99% Buddhist, They were medieval, and you couldn't go wrong. Pretty much it was, you find fairly reasonable, this ancient system there, this tradition. So the thing is, I think the same kind of clarity and caution we would use to check a college. I hear that people go all over the country, spend many thousands of dollars just checking out colleges for your child to go for 3 years, right? So is that called intelligence? You don't just leap in because you hear about an amazing college because the building looks cute and you sign up for 4 years and spend all your money. You go there, you check it out, you listen to the teachers, you look at the place, you check everything. We do this, we know this. Even look at the amount of research we do on the internet now to do anything. So that's the attitude, but we don't tend to have that with spiritual. We leap in with all this emotion and attachment, and let's say, I can think of people around the world I know who are not being rude, but you say they're spiritual or say they're Buddhist, and they're just wackos, There's one girl I know who's really seriously delusional, but had a very bright mind. She insisted she was enlightened, and then she began at the centre. She started getting these really high-powered initiations. She was completely out of her brain. You see, we're such peanuts. We think, oh, she sounds good, she must be good. I remember reading recently, this is a very interesting example. I remember reading recently about this some fellow in America who liked Hinduism. And he thought he'd do an experiment to show how idiotic we are when it comes to spiritual. He decided he'd set himself up as a Hindu Swami. He dressed like a Swami. He said Swami words. All these people came, all believed in him, all had faith in him, all said, be my guru. And then he announced it was a whole joke. So, it's a bit embarrassing. But you imagine it was cooking class. And you set yourself up, you had a cooking school, you started teaching, you know anything about cooking. Well, we'd know in the beginning. So we've got to use our common sense. We've got to know what a person knows. We've got to check on their credentials. The way they say it in the Indian literature, you check for 12 years before you take a person as your teacher. We'd be dead by then, So it's really important to use our intelligence, not just believe what we see, not to believe a person's words. Because people are delusional. And we know that when it comes to ordinary things. especially when it comes to something spiritual, I think we're in for the long term, you know, to really check on the credentials. If a person says that they're a monk, please check up that they're a monk. There's a person I know who says they're a monk, wore the robes, and I discovered they're not a monk. They lied, you know. They just said they are, but they're not. So these things are not easy to see. It's just, but it's so obvious in a sense, but we tend to get a bit emotional because we tend to think spiritual is kind of mystical, and you know, because a person's fairly charismatic, will feel touched by it, they will think that they're qualified. I mean, it's very interesting. One of the things I find is we make a big, among Buddhists themselves, okay, another example. I was the resident teacher at our centre in India, Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama's based, a centre there, for 1 year. And they were looking for a person to take over from me. Well, this monk, whom I've known for many years, he came to me for advice and said he was planning to apply for the job. And I knew what he knew. I was shocked that he thought he was qualified. I was really shocked. I knew what he knew. So I didn't want to be rude to him, so I tried to ask him questions so that he would see he didn't know the answer. So he did know the answer. But then I said, do you realise you don't know? How can you teach? He couldn't hear that he didn't know. And one of the commonest mistakes in spiritual, I think we confuse liking it with knowing it. So, you know, I said to him, I asked him these questions, he said, well, I sort of know it, but I just can't say it. I said, what's 1 + 1? 2. I said, you didn't say that. If you say, well, I sort of know it, but I can't say it, I think you're suggesting you don't know it. Do you understand? So we got to know, I mean, because if a person says they can cook, and they start telling you how to make a cake, but you haven't checked on them, but you've not got experience, you will never know that they're not telling you how to make a cake properly. I even just did, I remember 30, 40 years ago, I was doing martial arts. And I chose this when I was a radical feminist. I was living in New York, and I wanted a dojo that was just women. And I chose this dojo because the teacher was a woman. Now, I'm not saying she was anything or whatever, but I chose her for the wrong reason. I did the karate for 1 year. I went back to Australia. I said I was a blue belt. I went into the group. He put me back to the white belt. So I was so insulted. But I realised I'd chosen the wrong teacher. I didn't know I had learned it wrong. I had no reference. That's why you've got to check first. You don't have any experience, and you've got to check credentials, their status. You have to. It's just logical, reasonable, you know. And it's a big lesson. It's a really humbling lesson. Don't blame the other person. Blame our own foolishness for not checking. Do you see my point? We are the boss. You see, our trouble with spiritual is we tend to sort of think it's all about surrender, wow, the guru, it's a load of rubbish. Stop it. I always like to say, we are the boss, not Buddha. And because you're not a creator, that is literally true. We are the boss. We make the decision. And then when you do decide on a teacher, it's sort of like you choose that teacher. You give that person permission to show you how to work on your mind. And you better be confident. One Lama, old Lama in the 20th last century, he used to say, check your teacher very carefully because you're going to end up like them. I think it's time to go home, isn't it? Any more urgent questions? Yes, back here. One below. Yes, sweetheart.
Oh, I just was curious how the Buddha talks about abortion.
Abortion, okay. So abortion, okay, if we take the Buddha's view, as I mentioned before, that, okay, I'll use my own example, because I had an abortion when I was 23. And it's not too much information, I hope, but never mind, I'll tell you experience. I was a hippie at the time, right? It was in the 60s in London, and I was always whatever I did seriously. So if you're a hippie, you take sex seriously, okay? So I used to have these lots of boyfriends. And there was this one boyfriend, I remember it might be too much information, but it's answering your question in a personal way. So I was 23, and this boy, I didn't like him much, but I thought, oh, yeah, I'll be a good hippie and everything. So I remember that the second we had sex together, that second I knew, and I'd never had that experience before or since, I didn't think about these things then, I knew, quote unquote, I was pregnant. The second, in bed, right that moment. And that's the Buddha's point, that the consciousness goes into the egg and sperm. That's what causes birth to happen. That's what causes conception. Conception, by definition, is the egg and sperm growing, but what makes it grow is the entry of consciousness. So from that second, it's a human being. Clearly not a viable one, but it was a human being. So I knew that second I was pregnant, I knew I didn't want a baby. I didn't think of it as a person. I didn't think of it as a consciousness. I didn't think, I'd been a Catholic, I just didn't think that. I just knew, I visualised a baby and didn't want a baby. Do you understand? So I had an abortion. So then, Buddha's view then, generally, is that's a sentient being, a consciousness who's got some strong karma with you at the time of their past death. the karmic seed that triggered to get a human birth. In my case, they programmed to come straight to my womb. We had strong karmic connection. So this little person came running to my womb. But also you could say that consciousness had the karma to die young from past killing itself. So then I had the abortion. So we had this history together. So that's technically killing a human. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank
you. Yes, good. Okay. Look, and the Buddhist, there's also, we have this one little practice we do every day, we call it purification. The Buddhist view is there's no karma that can't be purified. And we call it the 4 R's. You regret the things you've done because you don't want the suffering. It's out of compassion for yourself. Then you have compassion for those you've harmed. Then you do a bit of a practice, and then you make a decision not to do it again. It's the process we go through. It's very practical, psychologically. Do you understand? Yes. Any more questions? One, I'm sure over here, one time. Oh, darling, over here, Kate. Kate. What do you say? 4 minutes we have. Yes. Yes, darling.
I'm just curious the Buddhism take on positive affirmations.
Oh my goodness, yes. There's different levels of practice. Kind of junior school is where you don't like swearing, close your ears, okay? As a friend of mine who's a therapist and a Buddhist, this first level we're talking about here is having your hands in your own shit, okay? Do you understand? Anybody who's done even 5 minutes of therapy knows it's painful. So you're learning to look at your rubbish and take responsibility for it. But then the crucial point is you're also recognising you've got to affirm your positive, because that's where you're heading with it. The only reason you go digging weeds in a garden is because you want the flowers. So finally, the only reason you look into your mind to find the delusions is so you can grow the goodness. So in the end, the more advanced level, but you can do these at different stages, is completely affirmation. It's totally the only reason you're looking at the misery is to develop your mind's potential. So absolutely vital part of our practice is, as they call it, rejoicing. Recognising the good, recognising your kindness, your love, your compassion, your potential. And then we have more courage to look at the rubbish. It's so easy. But if we're addicted to the misery, we can't even see our good. We know that. So we have to affirm it. We have to see it. Because that finally is the... It's often quite hard for us though. Do you understand? So yes, it's a massive part of it. Massive part. Am I communicating? Yes. We didn't have time to talk about compassion week, you see. We just did the wisdom week. And here too. Yes.
I just have a quick question.
Yes, darling.
If there are particular books or texts that you recommend in getting started.
I understand, yeah. Kate, are there some books that you give it away? You told the people? All gone. So, yes, I'll tell you what I can do is I can recommend, there's one good book, it's one I happened to edit years ago called How to Meditate. It's a good start. It's got a bibliography, but it's touching on a bunch of different Buddhist ideas, these things we're talking here, plus framing them in meditation, all kinds. There's about 30 or 40 techniques. How to Meditate by a person called Kathleen McDonald, published by Wisdom Publications. How to Meditate. Okay? Good start. And I edited it, so there you go. Over here. Yes.
What's just the sense of purpose?
Yes.
Where there's an attachment to it, or the actual really discovering of it through the Buddhist meditation, or what's your take on sense of purpose?
The meaning of the words.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Buddhist way of saying that is that our purpose is to grow our marvelous potential of wisdom and clarity and self-confidence and love and compassion so we can be of benefit to the poor old suffering world. That's the purpose. And that brings our own, it fulfills our needs and helps us fulfill the needs of others. It's to develop the 2 wings of the bird. That's how, the Buddhist view is our natural potential is to be this Buddha. Okay, that's long term. But that's the purpose of life is to grow yourself, become your own best person, and connect with others in a simple way of putting it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that could be, you could be a multi-millionaire, or you could be a quiet person, you have 10 children, you could be a monk or a nun. It doesn't matter the way you do it. It's to develop this marvelous potential, to know your own mind, develop your goodness, lessen the neuroses, for your sake, and of course then for the sake of others, because we all live together in this insane asylum. Do you understand? That's the purpose. Do you understand? Does that make sense? Okay. How are you going? Somebody down there. I think I'm supposed to come back in November or something on my way out. Just come into the States, now I'm going out of the States in November. I can come via Laguna Beach.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you, as a debatable Catholic to an ex-Catholic,
yes.
I'm curious as your thoughts or opinions
in the last 2 days that Pope Francis
Yes.
has been here and some of the messages that
Oh, I think he's a marvelous person. I really like the Pope. I think he just seems sincere. You know, he seems honest, sincere, humble, and I think he puts his money where his mouth is, to the best of his ability in this massive bureaucracy that must be there. You know, I think he's a marvelous human being. I think he's making a lot of people very pleased, isn't he? It's sort of like, I mean, when you hear the Dalai Lama talk, it kind of pleases people because he's talking universal truths, which is so fantastic. I think it's great. I'm a Buddhist now. I have great respect for my Catholic upbringing. Definitely. I sort of feel like I'm a Catholic, hippie, communist, feminist Buddhist. We motivate it. Now we've what we call dedication. And it's just sort of saying very roughly, there's 2 little prayers. Dedicating means, okay, we've sat here for, nearly 2 hours. And the Buddhist view would be as many moments as there have been, is as many thoughts we've had, and not one of these has gone astray. Buddha would say, we retain everything. And so every one of those is sown a seed. And so maybe we just think, maybe nourish those seeds from this moment forward, in our own lives, one step at a time, taking what tools we can, never giving up on our own amazing potential, and I mean never giving up on our amazing potential. So for our sake, to develop our qualities, so we can be a benefit to others. And then the second little prayer just makes this aspiration, the compassion, grow and grow in the hearts of all. Lama Sangye Drugyune Drowa Chikyan Malupar De Sala Gopasho Jamchod Senchog Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurchik Ke Panyam Pa Me Payam Gong Ne Gong Dugasho.
So, Venerable Robina, thank you on behalf of everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for coming to Orange County. And thank you for coming again in November, the night before Thanksgiving. Venerable Robina will teach. And we're going to do also a retreat in April, forthcoming. So on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much. And we were